The Arizona sun burned hot against Jack's back as he urged his horse down the canyon trail. He was a drifter, a cowboy with no destination, following nothing more than instinct and the promise of work on the horizon. The land was wild and untamed, the kind that tested a man's endurance and spirit. As he rode along the river, he noticed a dark shape thrashing in the current. It was a horse, its eyes wide with panic, its hooves clawing desperately against the rushing water. Without hesitation, Jack spurred his own mount forward, leapt from the saddle, and waded into the cold, punishing current. With all his strength, he cut the rope tangled around the horse's legs and guided it to the bank. The animal collapsed, exhausted but alive. Jack patted its trembling neck, whispering soft words until it stilled, unaware that his single act of courage had already set fate into motion. When Jack looked up from the rescued horse, he saw them, warriors silent as stone, standing on the ridge above the river. Their faces were unreadable, their eyes sharp as blades fixed on him. He straightened slowly, his hand resting near his belt but not on his gun. To his relief, they didn't raise their weapons. Instead, one dismounted and studied the horse Jack had freed. With a curt nod, the warrior gestured for Jack to follow. There was no threat in his movements, only a weight of authority that left little room for refusal. Jack knew enough of the frontier to understand he had crossed into territory not his own, and the only way to survive was to respect the people who ruled this land. With quiet resolve, he mounted and followed the riders deeper into the canyons, wondering what kind of welcome awaited a stranger who had dared to intervene. The Apache camp lay hidden in a wide basin, framed by red cliffs and dotted with brush huts and smoke from cooking fires. Children paused their play to stare at him, their eyes wary, while elders sat in circles watching every move he made. Jack dismounted when ordered, his boots sinking into the dust as the rescued horse was led away. At the center of the camp stood the chief, his long hair streaked with silver, his presence commanding. The chief listened as the warriors spoke of what Jack had done by the river, his expression unreadable. Then he raised his staff and motioned toward 3 women standing just beyond the fire pit. Jack's gaze shifted and his chest tightened. They were sisters, unmistakably so, with the same high cheekbones, the same fire in their eyes, though each carried herself differently, one with proud defiance, one with measured calm, and one with youthful mischief. The chief's voice carried over the camp, strong and unyielding. Though Jack understood only fragments of the Apache tongue, the meaning became clear when one of the older men stepped forward to translate. "By the law of our people," he said, his tone deliberate, "the man who touches what belongs to the daughters of this tribe binds himself to them. You saved the horse of my blood, and the horse is guarded by my daughters. By the law, you must take them as wives." The words struck Jack like a thunderbolt. He had expected gratitude or perhaps suspicion, but not this. His throat went dry, his mind reeling. Marry them? All 3? He searched the faces of the sisters, looking for disbelief, for laughter, for any sign that this was some cruel jest. But they stood steady, each gaze locked on him, as though waiting to see if he would accept or run. Jack's heart pounded as the truth sank in. He had been a drifter all his life, never tied to land or woman, moving from one job to the next. Now, by the simple act of saving a horse, he was shackled by a law he had never known existed. The sisters' eyes burned into him, not with hatred, but with a challenge he couldn't quite name. The camp around him grew silent, the fire crackling the only sound. He thought of drawing his revolver, fighting his way out. But he knew he wouldn't make it far, not against warriors who had lived by the bow and blade since birth. No, there was no escape. He was bound by a law older than his own people's, a tradition carved deep into the blood of this tribe. As he stood beneath the scorching desert sun, Jack realized his life as he had known it was over, and something entirely unexpected had just begun. Jack's first instinct was to fight the law, to push back against the fate laid out before him. He told the chief he was no husband, no father, no man to claim 3 lives at once. His voice echoed in the firelit council circle, but the Apache men only stared in silence, their judgment final. The sisters, seated together in the glow, studied him with unreadable eyes. He had expected scorn or anger, but instead found curiosity, even patience. Each glance they gave him unsettled his heart, for though they shared the same blood, their spirits were as different as the winds that crossed the desert. He could not ignore them, no matter how much he wished to walk away. In the days that followed, the camp became his cage. Jack worked alongside the men, tending horses and cutting wood, his every move shadowed by the sisters. He noticed the eldest, Nayeli, strong and bold, who corrected him sharply whenever he faltered. Her tongue cut like a whip, yet her eyes softened when she thought he did not see. The second sister, Liana, carried a gentleness that eased his restless spirit. She brought him water during the heat of the day, her hands steady, her voice soft as falling rain. The youngest, Marisol, was all fire and laughter, forever teasing him with quick remarks and sudden smiles that broke through his defenses. Together they surrounded him, pulling his heart in 3 directions. At night, he sat by the fire, trying to keep his distance, yet their presence lingered. Nayeli would speak of battles and survival, her courage like steel, forged in the mountains. Liana hummed quiet songs that reminded him of rivers he had never seen, her gentleness making him ache for peace. And Marisol laughed so freely that the stars seemed to echo her joy. Jack told himself he did not belong, that once his debt was repaid, he would leave. But each day it became harder to imagine walking away from those eyes, those voices, those souls so unlike yet bound together by blood. He was caught, not by chains, but by the pull of hearts. The struggle grew heavier as whispers filled the camp. Children laughed and called him the sister's husband, while the elders spoke of omens and tradition. Jack lay awake, staring at the canvas of stars, torn between duty and freedom. He had been a drifter all his life, carrying nothing but a saddle and a rifle, never rooted to land or kin. Now 3 women watched him as though he were their future, and he feared betraying them more than he feared losing himself. How could one man give his heart equally? How could he choose or refuse without shattering them all? One evening Nayeli challenged him. Directly, "Do you think we are prizes to be won, Cowboy?" she asked, her voice sharp as flint. Jack met her gaze, shaking his head. "I think you're women with lives of your own. I never meant to take that." For the first time, her stern face softened. "Then you are not like the others," she said almost reluctantly. Later, Liana sat beside him, her hand brushing his as she whispered, "Perhaps fate chose you, not us." And Marisol, with her playful grin, leaned close and teased, "Maybe you just need to learn how to share." Jack's heart thundered. Torn between fear and longing, the campfire became the stage of his turmoil. Every word, every smile, every silence seemed to bind him tighter. He watched the sisters together, their bond stronger than iron, and realized that any choice he made would wound them. Yet to walk away would dishonor their law and betray the trust already growing between them. He felt as though the desert itself had closed in around him, no trail left open but the one leading deeper into their lives. Jack, the drifter, the loner, found himself cornered by love itself, 3 different faces of it, impossible to deny and impossible to claim fully. As the moon rose high one night, Jack stood alone at the edge of the camp, staring at the horizon. His horse shifted restlessly beside him, as if urging him to ride away. Freedom was only a gallop away, yet his boots felt anchored to the earth. Behind him, the soft sound of laughter drifted from the sisters' tent, a melody that tugged at him stronger than the call of the open range. He realized then that his fight was not with law or custom, but with his own heart. And for the first time, Jack feared that the cowboy who had once belonged nowhere had finally found a place he could not leave. The danger came at dawn. A band of raiders, desperate and ruthless, swept down toward the camp, their shouts breaking the stillness of morning. Jack woke to the cries of children and the clash of steel. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and stood shoulder to shoulder with the Apache men. For the first time since arriving, he was no outsider but a defender of their home. Beside him, Nayeli barked orders with commanding strength, her bowstrings singing through the air. Liana moved swiftly, tending the wounded, her hands steady despite the chaos. Marisol carried water and shouted encouragement, her laughter even in danger lifting spirits. Jack felt something shift inside him, not fear, not duty, but belonging. The battle was fierce. Dust rose in clouds, bullets cracked against rock, and arrows whistled through the air. Jack's hat was torn from his head as he fired again and again, covering the sisters and shielding children behind him. At one moment, a raider broke through, charging toward Marisol. Jack leapt forward, tackling the man with a roar that surprised even himself. Blood spilled, sweat poured, but when the dust settled, the raiders fled, leaving the camp battered yet unbroken. Jack's chest heaved, his hands raw, but when he turned, he saw the sisters watching him, not as a stranger forced upon them, but as a man who had chosen to fight for them. That evening, the fire burned bright, casting long shadows over weary faces. The chief stood tall, speaking of tradition, of laws that bound their people. But he paused, his gaze settling on Jack. "This man came to us a drifter," he said, "but today he bled as one of us. Perhaps the law was not punishment, but a path we did not see." Murmurs rippled through the circle, yet no one disagreed. The sisters sat close together, their eyes shining with something more than duty. Gratitude, admiration, even love. Jack lowered his head, humbled. He had once cursed the law, but now he felt its weight as something less like a chain and more like a bond forged in fire. Later, when the camp quieted, Jack sat by the edge of the firelight. Nayeli approached first, her voice steady. "You fought like a warrior, not for yourself, but for us. You earned more than law, you earned trust." She touched his arm lightly, a rare softness in her boldness. Then Liana came, kneeling beside him. "You healed with more than bullets and blood," she whispered. "You gave hope when fear was near." Her hand rested briefly on his, warmth spreading through him. Finally, Marisol skipped forward, still grinning despite the day's scars. "Maybe you were meant for us all along, Cowboy," she teased, though her eyes carried truth. Jack looked at them, his heart torn and yet whole, knowing that in their different ways they had each claimed him. For days after, Jack wrestled with the choice. His old life called faintly, promising freedom and endless trails. But the sound of children's laughter, the sight of the sisters working side by side, the feel of the campfire's warmth, these things rooted him deeper than he had ever known. He thought of the law again, but not as a rule. He thought of family, of what it meant to belong not to one woman, but to three who shared their lives, their strength, their burdens together. Jack realized it was never about choosing one. It was about choosing all of them, and the life they represented. When the day of decision came, Jack stood in the center of the camp. The chief asked if he would honor their ways or walk away. Jack removed his hat, his voice clear though his hands trembled. "I came here with nothing but a saddle, and a past I thought meant nothing. But today I stand with more than I ever dreamed. If love means giving all you have, then I'll give it, to them, to this people, to this family." Silence filled the air, broken only by the crackle of fire. Then the sisters moved as one, standing beside him, their shoulders touching his. The chief nodded, and the people's voices rose in approval. That night, beneath a sky strewn with stars, Jack finally understood the strange path that had brought him here. He had once seen the law as a curse, a chain wrapped tight around his freedom. But in the sisters' eyes, in their laughter and strength, he saw the truth. He had been freed from loneliness, from drifting without a place to belong. In their presence he was not divided, but complete. The law had given him more than he thought possible. 3 hearts bound to his, 3 souls walking beside him, and a future not chosen by his will, but by fate's strange mercy. Years later, when travelers passed through the territory, they often spoke of the cowboy who lived among the Apache with 3 wives, all sisters, all strong in their own way. Some mocked, some marveled, but all agreed on one thing: never had a man looked more at peace. Jack himself no longer cared for judgment. He had found something greater than the freedom of the trail. He had found a family forged in fire, tested by law and bound by love. What began as a struggle of hearts had ended as the story of a man,